Romance Reading Part 2. I am so thrilled for multiple reasons right now. First, this is our last set of panels today. So it has been a great day, and I hope you guys have all had as much fun as I know I've had doing this and being here and being part of this whole day event. It's been a long day, but so much fun. And I get to spend my last panel with these three amazing people. I have been looking forward to this panel all day long. Yes, I know I've said that to all my panels, but I really mean it.
He really means it this time.
Everybody here is wonderful, and we're doing romance, so there's going to be a little bit of everything. We're doing a reading, so you don't know what you're going to get. You might get a little naughty bits. You might not get no little naughty bits, but we'll be talking about it afterwards with our Q&A. So let's start with Merrill. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Oh, happy Saturday, everybody. I'm R.L. Merrill. You can call me Ro. I am here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I write contemporary and paranormal and horror and romance. And there's always a little bit of music and always a little bit of hope in all my stories.
Awesome. Erica, how about you?
Hi, I'm Erica Cameron. I live in Florida, and I write young adult across multiple genres: fantasy, thriller, paranormal, contemporary, and tend to write across various romantic and asexual spectrums to try to represent me and all of my friends.
Fantastic. And I had the joy of catching you and Ada, who's going to talk in just a second, in the last panel talking about that very subject. And it was really very impressive. You guys did a great job. And I learned a lot. So thank you for that. Ada, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Hi, welcome. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, but I am coming to you from New Zealand. So greetings from the future. It is Sunday here. So far, the world is still here. Yep, I write mostly romance, but I'll write just about any flavor of romance as long as there are people falling in love in said romance. Mostly self-published now. Well, basically all self-published now. And I also just started my own publishing company because there are no genre publishing houses in New Zealand. And I thought that was wrong. So now I am a publisher as well.
Wow.
And the first novel I just published by Jamie Sands, who is, I think, hanging around this conference as well, is currently up for 2 awards. It's down here. So
congratulations.
It's called The Other Side of the Mirror. You should all look it up. It's good.
Wonderful. Well, let's start with, in fact, looks like Jamie Sands is here. She says, yay, Rockery Press. Woo! That was my impression. Hopefully I got it right, Jamie. Erica, let's go ahead and start with your reading. If you don't mind. Throw you under the bus first.
Sure. So I was going to read something from the fantasy series that is actually going out of print. So if you like it and you want one, go buy it now before they disappear from the warehouses. And I actually have 2 different sections that I was going to let you guys pick. First, major interaction, or slightly more romantic major interaction. So initial interaction in the book between the 2 main characters, or the slightly
Give us the meet cute. Come on.
Okay, well, all right, yes, sure. I will start at the beginning. So the title of the book is Island of Exiles. It is a young adult fantasy, just to establish that much at least. You're going to be late for the vigil if you stand here staring into nothing for much longer, Kaya. I tense, keeping my eyes on the angry, dark blue, white-capped waves. I'd heard the footsteps approaching, but several people had come and gone already and left me alone. Tessin, however, never was able to keep its thoughts inside his head. I won't be late. I avoid looking at him until he moves into my peripheral vision. He leans against the wall to the left of me, his forearms crossed on the ledge and his head tilted up. With his arms folded on the ledge and his body held slightly away from the wall, I can make out the lines of muscle under layers of cloth, all of it hard-earned, though I probably won't ever admit that to him. I don't look directly at him, but I turn my head enough to get a better look at his face. He's taller than me, so looking down on him like this is strange. Seeing him without the hood and atakufu we usually wear on duty is stranger. I don't think I've seen his whole face since he became a Nishin over a year ago. His thick eyebrows sit low over his deep-set eyes, and the line of his nose is straight, because somehow he was always quick enough in training to avoid all but the most glancing blows to his face. The setting sun highlights the red in his terracotta skin and makes his oddly pale eyes flash. Usually they're limestone gray, but now they're paler than ever and gleaming almost as bright as the sunlight off the ocean. Shouldn't you be off training or guarding something? I ask before he speaks. I am. He smirks at me. I'm guarding the mad Nishin girl who decided to perch on the walls and imitate a mickenbird. I'm not planning on attempting flight. I wave my hand at him, trying to brush him off. You can go now, Nishin 10. His lips purse, and I hide a smile. It was delightful discovering exactly how annoyed he got when I called him by his class and rank instead of his name. The flash of aggravation disappears quickly, replaced by his more usual sardonic smile. Should I guess what has you lost in your own head at the night of a vigil? No, I don't have that much time. Then I won't guess. Only your brother puts that look on your face. I look at him, expecting to see mockery in his eyes. There isn't any. He looks almost serious. You're worried about his Arenchi, unless he's in trouble again. It's been a while. He's overdue. It's been a while because he doesn't have to deal with people who point out his every mistake anymore, like you. Gritting my teeth, I bend to brace my hand on the ledge and jump down to where Tessin stands. At 6 feet, he's only an inch or two taller than me. Our eyes are nearly level when I square off against him. You're one of the reasons he ever got in trouble in the first place. And you spent years trying to make him invisible. Tessin's lips thin, and the muscles in his jaw clench for a moment. Even before you found your wards, you shielded him from everything. What he can do now that you're not there to monitor his every move should be all the proof you need. He would have died if I hadn't protected him. Nothing will ever convince me it was wrong to keep him alive. You can't seriously be suggesting I should have let that happen. No, that isn't. You don't even know what he's capable of. How long has it been since you've seen him fight? It's been. He steps back, his lips pressed tight and his hands held away from his weapons. Fellows, Kaya, I didn't come here to fight with you. This isn't how this was supposed to go. I blink. What? Present backing away from an argument? This has to be a trick. How what was supposed to go? He shakes his head, a small smile quirking up the corners of his mouth. I only came to ask if you'd dance with me tonight at the celebration. He can't be serious, but there's not a single sign that he isn't being sincere. I drop my gaze to hide the confusion that has shown on my face. My focus catches on the pendant gleaming against the undyed cloth of his tunic, a 2-inch iron disc etched with cross Zika swords. Blood and rot, I hate seeing that around his neck. The Zika is the symbol of the Kaigo. The pendant is the symbol of their students. Tessin is wearing the Kaigo C pendant that should have been mine. Out of the whole clan, the Merisei and the Kaigo only chose one per year. His mother, Niva, is on the Kaigo Council. Being named a Kaigo C isn't a guarantee of advancement, but it's a sign that the leaders of the clan are keeping an eye on you. They're given extra training and have to face additional tests of magic, skill, and leadership. Not every Nishin who becomes a student becomes a council member. But no one who isn't will ever become one. I can still earn one, and I will, sooner rather than later. But it seems like they're already grooming him to take his mother's place. Rot take him, it was supposed to be me. Swallowing the fruitless envy building in my chest, I raise my eyes to meet his again. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. But that's not a no, so I'll ask again tonight. He smiles, inclines his head, and then walks away whistling. I hate that sound, and I'm almost positive he knows that.
Very nice. Very cool. Sounds fun. Ro, why don't you go next?
Okie dokie. This is an excerpt from my story, The House Must Fall, and it is part of the Haunts and Hellions anthology from Horror Addicts Press. And here we go. The year is 1875, Mercer Manor, Millbrae, California. The moment I stepped onto the grounds of Mercer Manor, I knew one thing for certain. I would leave the place undone. Such thoughts rarely plagued my consciousness. I'd always been a happy-go-lucky fellow, not one for superstition or worry. Mercer Manor filled me with dread, but I was on a mission. Montgomery Mercer, the person I loved most in the world, hadn't returned to the University of California in Berkeley after the holiday break. It was now March, and I was determined to discover what had happened to him. I took a ferry across the San Francisco Bay to the peninsula and hired a coach up the foggy hillside. The driver sang to himself an old Irish tune I'd heard my grandparents sing as a child, and I found myself tapping my feet in time, mostly to ward off the chill and the melancholy threatening to ruin my excitement at seeing Monty. "You'll have to set off on foot from here," the coach driver shouted as he pulled up to the gates of the estate. I opened the door and pulled my coat tighter around myself. The house straight up the hill. I knew from a previous visit where it was, but I was unable to see it. The fog, which had usually burned off by then, was still clinging stubbornly to the hillside despite the sun shining over the rest of the bay. I could see the blue sky over the water, but his estate was gray, damp, and somewhat foreboding. The crunch of gravel under my boots seemed so loud I wished I could silence so I would not be discovered. I feared, without reason, someone detecting my presence before I was ready. The fog lessened and the house came into view. Calling it a house, however, felt like an understatement. The manor was an entity, a dark, looming feat of architecture that jutted out of a plateau in the hillside and stood majestically overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I found myself staring into the sky, trying to make out the tops of the trees, when the front door opened and there was a servant standing there. Another familiar woman stepped through the doorway and paused at the top of the stairs, hands clasped in front of her, a frown marring her lovely face. "I was not aware we had a visitor arriving today," Monty's mother said. I gave her my most winning smile, which did nothing to crack her icy demeanor. "Wonderful to see you, Mrs. Mercer. It's Sterling from the university." Her frown eased, but there was nothing welcoming in her expression. "Of course. Sterling Mackey. I wish I could say it was wonderful to see you too, but you really shouldn't have come." That was not the answer I'd been expecting. I climbed the steps and was not sorry that I towered over her when I reached the top. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until I see Montgomery." I smiled again, but it was my "don't underestimate me because I'm charming and handsome" smile. Instead of being put off, she sighed, and I noticed a slump to her shoulders, a weariness I'd not seen in her before. True, I'd only met her twice, once when Montgomery and I first began our studies together 2 years prior, and the second when I joined Montgomery on a trip home during the holidays. I'd pestered him for an invitation, which he'd been quite reluctant to give. He claimed his family was terribly uptight and that the weather would be foggy and dreary, and wouldn't we rather visit my family in Virginia City again? I thought perhaps his protest was because we could not be ourselves in front of his family, or he was worried our banter and affection would give away the true nature of our relationship. Since I'd arrived unannounced and seemingly unwelcome, I was beginning to wonder if it were something more he was hiding. "Since you're here, I suppose a short visit won't be too taxing on Montgomery. You may come in." She looked down at my luggage and wrinkled her nose slightly as if showing her distaste for my call. "Thank you. I've written many letters. Surely Monty knew I would come to see him if he didn't respond." The large doors, fitted with colorful stained glass, closed loudly behind me, making me jump. Mrs. Mercer didn't flinch. She turned to face me, and her grave expression chilled me worse than the damp air of the bay. "I'm afraid Montgomery hasn't been up to correspondence. I'll take you to him so you may say your piece, and then you must leave. I shall have our driver take you back to the ferry station." "There aren't any more ferries departing until Monday, so I shall have to impose upon your hospitality, at least until then. I'm sure you won't mind," I said, pouring on the charm. "My parents will be very appreciative. They love having Monty around our home and look forward to his next visit." Mrs. Mercer's lips pressed together and she turned away from me, gazing into the darkened parlor to our right. "Montgomery will not be traveling anymore. That is no longer possible. Follow me." She picked up her pace, leading me to the elaborate staircase on the left. As we reached the landing, gray light shone from the windows at the end of the hallways, but all the rooms were closed up. I knew the third floor was Monty's lair. Bright and airy, it was a large open space with musical instruments, books, a telescope he used to watch boats on the bay, and other odds and ends that kept him entertained. I wondered if perhaps he already knew I was there, that maybe he'd been watching the boats, maybe he even saw my coach arrive. The thought made me quicken my steps, but Mrs. Mercer was in front of me, halting my progression. "If it's all right with you, I can see myself upstairs." He's not in his study, she said, turning left. He stays in his room most of the time now. He avoids the sunlight. Her behavior up to that point should have been enough to alarm me, but the piece of news put a lump in my throat. Could it be that something was truly wrong with Montgomery? Follow me, she said, her voice hoarse. I felt terrible that I'd upset her. Even though she'd been cold towards me, it was obvious that she was troubled. In my worst nightmare, I could never have imagined what I would find on the other side of the door. The only light in the cavernous room with high ceilings came from two cracks in the drapes. Those slivers illuminated pillows on either side of a dark figure lying in the middle of an imposing four-poster bed. Mrs. Mercer leaned over the bed and whispered, her narrow back blocking the view of my best friend, my companion, my beloved. And you'll have to read the rest to see what happens.
Tease, tease. Both you and Erica, tease. All right, Ada, what do you got for us?
Okay, so I will be reading from this. So just a heads up, I have phonological dyslexia, so reading out loud, not the easiest thing for me, even my own work. So there's going to be a bit of, yeah, I'm doing my best here on this one.
You've got it.
Arthur looked over the crowd. More people had shown up than he expected. He recognized most of them. There were guys from his dad's old unit that he would meet up with every so often, guys from the lumber yard where he used to work, guys he hung out with at the bar. On one side was his mother and her friends from church there for support. On the other side was Han and his sisters. It was Martin's fast feet and quick words that kept the two groups apart. Some minister he didn't recognize had spoken. One of his dad's old war buddies told a story they'd heard 1,000 times but instantly forgot. Then he was gestured to stand. He looked down at a piece of paper clutched in his hand, the final failed attempt at writing a eulogy in advance. He looked back up, his heart beginning to race and his mouth going dry. His eyes skimmed over the crowd, desperate for a lifeline of some sort. His gaze fell on Martin, sitting in the back, calm and still like a stone that had to be built around, impossible to move. My father contradicted himself. The borrowed words came without conscious thought. He contained multitudes. Arthur felt his heart begin to settle. There are many in this room today who loved Jason Drams, and there are many who hated him, and for the most part they are the same people. This is the eulogy I tried to write. He held up the crumpled paper. It's just the word bastard written about 50 times, and he would have probably been the first to agree with that assessment. He would probably have wanted me to read it word for word, laughing the whole time. He was contradictions. He loved this place, but railed against its small-town mindset. He was proud to have served and horrified by the things he did while serving. He could work himself to death, yet still seem lazy, give you the shirt off his back, but still seem cheap. He loved so many people so deeply, but could never quite work out how not to hurt them. He judged no one when he was judged by so many. There was a crack in his voice and a burn in his throat. He locked his eyes on Martin, a solid lifeline, and he inspired love and devotion in those who should have probably just walked away. He tried to be a good man at the end of the day. He was a good man. He had his faults, flaws, and there were things he just screwed up royally. But he acknowledged those. He never tried to present himself as something other than what he was, a loving, charming, big-hearted, total bastard. He quickly wiped away a tear that had escaped. There are grumpy, half-frozen crows on the lawn outside. They don't care that a man who was loved has died, and even if they don't know that a man who was loved has died, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. He'd tell us not to be maudlin, not to cry. He'd want a party in his name and be disappointed if at least one person didn't pass out. He was a good man, and for all his flaws, that's how I will try to remember him. Arthur sat back down, his pulse pounding in his ears. His mother took his hand and leaned against his shoulder. The minister got back up, said something Arthur didn't really hear. His mother gave him a push when it was time to lift the casket. That seemed so short. He was sure his father had been taller. Some of his dad's old army buddies, the ones in better health, helped him make the slow procession to the hearse. People started to mill around. Only a few would head up to the burial. The rest would avoid the biting wind. Janine said she'd go back to the house to set up the little luncheon. He spotted Han and his sisters at the edge of the crowd, watching. A flash of rage for a moment overwhelmed the grief. It wasn't right. Han loved his father. She should have been the one rallied around, cared for as the grieving widow, instead of being seen as some foreign mistress, their love somehow worthless despite all their years. Martin followed his gaze, then stepped up to his mother, holding their tissues and turning her away, speaking softly as she did. Arthur pushed past the guests, each wanting a moment to express sympathy, and stopped in front of Han. Her eyes were red, but there were no sign of shed tears. He pulled her close, and he felt her arms go up around him, holding him tight, strong from years of hard work. I'm sorry, he said softly, trying to apologize for himself, his father, society, and every other drop of bullshit he could think of. She nodded against his chest, then pulled away. He hugged each of his sisters, next muttering some words that they all knew were useless, but was the kind of things you said anyways. He hugged Sonia last. Are you going to come back? She asked. Can I get a reservation at your dessert place? No, but if you ever get fired, I'll let you wash dishes. They both smiled as much as they could. Thanks. He hugged her again. You know, you've got more balls than I ever thought, bringing your boyfriend to this. He's not my whatever. She gave him one more hug. Don't be a stranger. Yeah, you too.
Nicely done. Again, another tease. But, what can we expect from romance writers, right? I mean, that's...
Well, go buy the book and read it yourself.
Yeah, well, like I said, like I've been saying most of the day, my to-be-read list keeps growing and growing and growing.
I don't think we have time for us all to read 100,000-word novels.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for sharing those tidbits with us. Great bits and pieces. So I do have some questions. Thought we would jump right into them. First, what do you enjoy most about writing romance stories? I mean, what is it that, what inspires you? What is it that you find that makes the fingers type across the keyboard, so to speak? Erica, why don't we go with you?
Well, there's a little bit of, I don't want to say wish fulfillment, but there's a level of control when you're a writer to make things go the way that you want them to go. And that's both for the romances and for everything else. Like, you can make sure that, suffering has a point. You can make sure that the enemy gets defeated. You can make sure that the clues actually mean something. And that's something that doesn't always happen in real life. And so that's definitely one of the things that I enjoy about writing, is that, yeah, that level of control over a world. There's something safe in it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, that's actually a really good point. I think most authors feel very similar to that. And it doesn't matter the genre. It can be in any genre. It's like you get to set the rules and you get to drive the story and you get to see, you get the ending that you want, or the characters tell you want. Yes.
You have differing levels of control depending on the story and the characters, of course. But yeah,
that's true.
It's still, it's a safe place to work things out, and to put a different ending on things that may have happened in your own life, or to create a completely new situation that you get to live through.
Yeah. Ro, what about you?
I totally agree with that. Although, yeah, control is an illusion, isn't it? But I
There's
think
a reason why we write fiction.
yeah. I think it's also about hope and providing hope for my readers, because that's why I read romance, is because I want to know going into a story that I'm going to be okay when it's over. And we don't get that in life. We take risks and we do things that are uncomfortable sometimes in real life, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. But I know when I pick up a romance novel that it's going to be okay. maybe not the way I think it's going to be, or I might have to go through some hurts to get there. But and I like writing it too, because like you said, it's a way to kind of work things out. And for me, it's also a way to honor people that have been through situations that I find inspiration in. I like to tell stories about things that have happened to people that I know sometimes, or things that inspire me, and so it's my way of honoring those people.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really a good point. Yeah, definitely pulls a little bit of your world into it. And
Mhm.
lets you kind of give the endings you felt were necessary. Ada, what about you?
Kind of a bit of both. I mean, there's going into writing a romance, even with the twists and the turns, and sometimes the characters fighting you tooth and nail, you're going to give a happy ever after. And especially writing the people we write, there's a lot in the world that a lot of people just don't get a happy ever after. And you can at least say, well, at least here, look, it might be fiction, but somebody is getting this happy ever after that they need. And especially in the last, I haven't written a lot in the last few years because the last few years were kind of hard, I think, across the board for everyone. Um, but I think we needed a lot of that. Just knowing, just picking up a book and knowing that at the end there might still be problems, but this one little thing will be okay.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of why I write. And also, I just have a lot of very noisy people living in my head, and they need to go on paper.
Yeah, I can actually relate to that. If I could charge rent, I'd be a millionaire. One of the
Especially
other
with area prices.
oh yeah, especially with the rent here, right?
Mhm.
Um, so as we know, there are tropes in writing, and hopefully some of you saw the earlier panel discussion today about tropes and all that. If you didn't, you can catch it on YouTube. But with tropes, and I suppose we can pull in cliches and archetypes and all that. But are there tropes in specifically in romance? And it doesn't have to be specifically set in a romance story, but even in like romance, like in a fantasy book or sci-fi or whatever, where you do have romance things that you try to avoid. Are there just some tropes that you just sit there and go, no, nope, not gonna do it, can't make me, not gonna, don't wanna.
Anything with a massive power imbalance.
Yes.
And I admittedly, my first novel was, I had one very wealthy character. I accidentally wrote a billionaire romance, and the other character was definitely not. But that was, flat out addressed on the page. I had one character saying, look, I do not need a sugar daddy. I live within my means. I do not need to be saved.
Mhm.
And, told him to screw off for 5 chapters and he had to come begging back. Yeah, so anything with a power imbalance, fuck or die trope, not big into. Um, you know, anything with questionable consent, the arranged marriage thing, which is, I know, kind of big in the historicals. I'm not really into. Yeah, those are kind of my. I know some people are really into them, and some people like them, and some people can make them work. But it's like, yeah, there's enough of that in real life. I'd rather just people be working on the same level.
Cool. Erica, want to jump in?
No, that's kind of my big one too. It's like I'm game for power dynamic stuff, where it's like the relationship has, somebody who's usually more in control and somebody who's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like that is fine, but definitely what Ada was saying with the power differential, which is a very different beast. And it's so hard to have a relationship that feels equal in any way when one part of their life is so out of balance. The teacher student, the boss employee, the like all of those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be money. It can be social status. It can be like the arranged marriage thing, like all of those sorts of things. It's just so I've seen them done well. Like I've seen people who make it work. But it has to be dealt with and it has to be handled and there has to be acknowledgement that this is an issue.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's fair. Ro, what about you?
Well, I agree to a point. Certainly the teacher student, that's my big one that I don't do. I'm a teacher in real life. And I have actually been on the side of teachers abusing their power, seen it happen in my career, and that is a big no-no. However, I did write a story that was a teacher student where they were adults. And it's interesting because the teacher in this case is hired to work with this man over the summer to help him earn his high school diploma because his 12-year-old daughter is disappointed in him that he hasn't done that. So in that sense, she has the power, but he's also a millionaire rock star living in the Hollywood Hills. So there's definitely, I played with that on both sides, but the teacher student one is a big no for me as a reader and as a writer. I just feel like that's not someplace I want to go.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I find that's really interesting about the power dynamics is, at least for me as a reader, when it comes to the whole idea of romance, I don't necessarily have a problem with the power dynamics in that with the caveats of, whatever the caveats need to be. But sometimes you get a person who is well off in a story, and I've seen it done well and I've seen it done horribly, who has the means and all that and has the perceived power, but it's the other person that actually has all the power in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just because the person you think might have the power, but then you find out that doesn't. I really like that in a story because that means that the author was thinking about it. And they decided, it's like, look, here's this trope, right? Wealthy person, poor person, whatever. I'm going to flip it. The person who you think has all the power doesn't. And so as a reader, I actually enjoy some of that sometimes because it's kind of fun. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that kind of what you were thinking, or am I totally off base?
Versions are good, and like I said, like that, I've seen boss employee Anna Szabo has a whole series of like workplace romances, and there's a few that are kind of specifically boss employee, but there's also like a power dynamic thing, and the employee is the dom and the boss is the sub, and so there's like a role reversal thing where it's like each of them does have power in certain situations, and so it balances that, and so it does what you're saying, where it acknowledges that this is an issue, and they acknowledge on the page that this is an issue, and then they deal with it in certain ways. And so I think that that's the key to making those sorts of situations okay, is you have to actually deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I accidentally wrote a billionaire book. It was was not intending on doing that. I mean, I sort of wrote like two alphas, one of which is this, corporate billionaire, but he is incredibly overworked and stressed to the max, and is not as much of an alpha as he likes to think he is. And the other one is this very impoverished single father, but he is, he has done this on his own and he works his ass off, and he does not take anything from anyone, not a slightest amount of grief. And as soon as he felt that the relationship, as soon as he got uncomfortable with the relationship, even though it was basically his first relationship, he was just like, nope, I'm done. And he broke it off. And the billionaire had to come back and go, hey, look, I'm sorry, I apologize, and I understand where you're coming from, because I started out, living, down by the tracks and had to work up, and I forgot what it was like to be in your situation. So there was groveling. But yeah, but it involved a lot of discussion. As my first two books were actually one book, and there's a reason it was 130,000 words. It was because there was a lot of discussion between those two, working out the power dynamics, just them talking, so much talking.
Yeah.
Like, so much of it got edited out by people going, look, they don't have to talk it. You could have them sleep together or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what's kind of nice and I think what you've all said is it's finding the balance.
Yeah.
Making sure that the romance or the emotional attachment is is what I'm hearing is balanced.
Yeah.
And I think that seems to be key. And Ada, I like what you said. I like stories where they go in and they seem real. They have the conversations. They talk the hard talks, even if it's done in summary, right? However, yeah. Because you can relate to it. I mean, I know there are people who, and erotica is a whole different story, but there are people who, these romance erotica stories where they meet and then they're in bed the rest of the book, and then somebody gets their pinky out of joint, and then they don't talk for 5 pages, and then they're back in bed, and then it ends, and you don't really know anything about anybody. You didn't learn anything. So, I mean, that's, what I kind of got from what you were saying, it is that talking, that working through the baggage.
Yeah.
That's what tends to make a good, I think a good story and a good romance, not just that, but all the other stuff too.
Well, I'm all for people talking out their baggage on page. I'm down for that. Give me all the baggage. I want to know the dirt, the background, the traumas. I want to make sure that their baggage matches, because that's how I know it's going to be a happy ever after. They've got to know that their baggage goes with each other.
Yeah.
I want to know all that.
Well, because it proves then that they're a good match.
Yes.
That's how I think of it. Speaking of romance, speaking of erotica, we all have different ways as authors of dealing with the more adult scenes, the sex scenes. Thank God I'm already red, because I will shortly be turning even brighter red with this question. And the answers I'm probably bound to get. As romance writers, or as writers in general, how do you deal with the sex scenes? Do you do a fade to black? Do you do on full erotica, etc.? Or is that not part of your story at all? Is it something more? So, Ro, why don't we start with you on this one?
Oh, let's just start with this one. So it was funny. I was on Clubhouse the other night and talking with some other authors about how steamy do we like our scenes that we read, and also when we write. And I can go either way. I read some stuff that's fade to black. I read some stuff that is, quite erotic. But I think that it depends on whether it advances the story, whether you're getting to know the characters through how they interact with each other in the bedroom or wherever they happen to be. My books, when I first started writing, I think I wrote many more, like more quantity. And I feel like I've tried to work on writing more quality as I've progressed. And so sometimes there's fewer scenes. But they can be anything from, just a really steamy kiss to kitchen counters, staircases. Yeah, but there tends to always be something awkward and funny that happens, because that's realistic and that's real life. And that's how you really get to know the characters and how they deal with things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the fact that in your stories, you do add that, because it's like you said, it's real. I mean, nobody has the perfect television movie romance scenes. Sorry, that just doesn't happen. Somebody gets a leg cramp, somebody's toe hurts, somebody pokes somebody with their finger in the wrong way. I mean, it's just, it's just, hey, these things happen. Erica, how about you? How do you deal with this part of the romance routine?
So my romances tend to be subplots to begin with, but then I also have written only young adults, and so that's definitely a different beast. Not to say that there aren't sex scenes in young adult, not to say that there shouldn't be, because I mean, I was definitely a young adult when I had sex for the first time, so it happens. It's part of their lives. It's part of their experiences. It definitely should be in there. But the sex that I have included in my books, which already is kind of minimal, is far more summary than explicit. And I tend to close the door on those scenes as more often than I include them. More because it tends to be the fact that they've hit that point in their relationship that's important, not what they do in bed.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what happened behind the door. It just matters that they went behind the door. And so it doesn't serve the story to create this whole 5-page sex scene for the characters. And so most of the time it's not included. And when it does actually serve the characters, those few instances, it has been on the page. But yeah, I will probably never write erotica. It's just not going to be me.
Yeah.
I'm far too. I will read whatever, but I am far too ace to write erotica.
Yeah. Well, and that's a fair point, because I don't enjoy erotica. It's not in books. It's just not my thing. It's like, I don't want to read 10 pages of a sex scene. It's like, fine, a summary, fine, page and a half, great. But any more than that, I'm just like, yawn, moving on. And I will actually flip through the pages until it's done, because it's just not interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm over it. Okay, they had sex. Okay, 5 pages later, oh my God, they're still having sex. Flip, moving on. Until I get back to the story. Ada, what about you?
Okay, well, so I cut my teeth on fan fiction, which meant I looked it up, and I literally wrote about 1,000,000 words of fanfic before I ever published anything professionally. So I wrote everything from like the filthiest filth you've ever encountered. Oh my God, I don't know what bit of my brain that came out of, to like the most incredibly sweet fate black. There's little butterflies around, whatever. So I can technically write the whole spectrum. For me though, when it comes to my work, it completely depends on what the story needs. It's like these guys. The big bit at the end is they hold hands, they touch hands, and they link fingers, and that is huge for them, and that's as much physical contact as those two are ever going to have, pretty much, because that anything more is not who they are. And yet, bestseller. This one, second bestseller of all times. Huge quantities of sex in it. Main character, I just checked, literally on his knees in page 9. They meet at a high-end sex club. Lots and lots of very descriptive sex in it. That's what if people pick up this book, that's what they're going to get. And I think the cover sort of tells them that's what you're going to get. But that was those two characters started off wanting a purely sexual relationship, and then they went and caught emotion. Whereas with other books I've written, my first novel, they start out, there's a scene early, well, not even early on, like maybe about a third of the way through, where they're just making out on the couch, and it's like one of their first dates, really slow burn. And the teenage son of one of the characters comes in making out with his girlfriend because he thinks the apartment's empty. And there is like across the board screaming, and they roll out off the couch, and someone hits their head, it gets kneed in the balls, and it's just a disaster. Everyone's embarrassed, and yeah, and that works for that story.
Yeah.
So really, it's completely up to how much sex the characters want and how much sex the story needs, and I try to make it as realistic as possible. um no one's getting bent in ways they physically can't, and usually.
Or have an
So
extra
yeah.
body part suddenly appear. Like, wait, there's only
I've occasionally written, ones with multiple partners, and I've had to sit there and like drawn little stick figures going, okay, whose arm is where? Whose bit is going to which bit? It's like, okay.
yeah, it's like a football play. It's like a football play. It's like you got to know where all your players are and keeping track of them.
Yeah, yeah. The two and one person getting off watching is way easier. I found that. Yeah, if you ever see that in my work, that's because I just like couldn't deal with trying to.
Yeah, I've seen authors post pictures of dolls.
I was going to say that's when you start
Barbies,
stealing
or like
the
the
children's
little
dolls.
the little art figures that you can. Yeah.
One of
Katie
the
Robert is good about that.
one of the comments we got on our stream chat was, "I also use stick figures." So yeah, it's whatever it takes to make it work and be real. Because I have read books where it's like I'll go and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 2 people and there's 5 hands. How does that work?
Was it alien romance? Because
No.
all bets are off. They could have multiple parts. And
no. As far as I know, they were supposed to be human. So
okay.
Before we wrap up, because good, time just flies when you're talking sex and romance. I want to ask each of you, what is the most difficult part about writing romance in your stories?
Just writing, just sitting down and putting the fingers on the keyboard and making it work, or the pen on the paper. Just fine. Yeah. I mean, that's the hardest. I mean, there's that little, Lisa Simpson quote: "Writing is the hardest thing ever." Yeah, just sitting down and freaking writing, and especially when the house is a mess and I've got to take the kid to stuff, and it's just. I mean, it's Mother's Day down here. I'm supposed to be doing Mother's Day stuff, and I'm supposed to be at her sports ball game right now, and yeah.
Yeah. Mother's Day. I'll be cleaning my house tomorrow all day and rearranging to welcome home a child from college. So yeah, it's
yeah. And the house is a mess and the laundry hasn't been folded and there's stuff growing in the dishes, and it's just sitting down and writing. Yeah. That's the hardest thing about writing romance or anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just finding the time to do it. Ro, what about you? What's the hardest part about writing romance?
It's the time constraints. It has been for me. Although I only have 3 more weeks of being employed in my day job. And then after that, I don't know what's going to happen. I tell myself I'll be able to write everything, but I also know that with more time comes more distractions, and oh, well, you're not working, so you can do this, and oh, well, you're not. So it'll be a challenge. I think the other thing for me is I tend to have these grand ideas and then making it actually work. Yeah, that tends to be like my last book that I sent to my editor. She sent it back and said, okay, so I liked the middle part. Yeah, that's rough feedback to get. She pretty much hated the beginning and the end, and I get it, because the beginning I wrote like 12 years ago and I'd been sitting on it, and then the end was like 27,000 words I wrote in about 3 days because I was gonna miss my deadline. So I totally get it, but yeah, that was a book that I tried something different and needs more work before it can go out in the world.
I've had
Yeah,
those edit
there's
letters.
reasons no one's seen my science fiction detective stories yet.
Ooh,
It's a grand plan.
grand
Oak
plan.
Street Blues meets Babylon 5.
Okay,
It ain't
I
out.
love it.
Oh, it ain't ready.
Erica, what about you?
It's especially difficult sometimes to like because my romances are not like full romances, like that's not the point of the story. It becomes more complicated to layer the romance into the plot and tie it in a way where the problems in the romance make sense for the situation, and it's like not like they're having some stupid petty argument when like bullets are flying, unless that works. But it's just you've got to balance out the actual needs of the plot and the larger story with what's happening. And it can also be difficult, like especially for my fantasy series, those characters were so practical and pragmatic overall that like my editor was like, well, they need some sort of fight, and I'm like, okay, but they're in this situation and like neither of them would care enough about anything else to be fighting with each other about some stupid stuff that's happening. It's like I don't want to manufacture tension just to give them strife when they're dealing with enough other stuff right now. I feel like why can't they be the solid point in in the world? And so like that can be the thing, is because it is actually really difficult to sell a relationship that works. Like that's actually really hard. It's really hard to convince an editor that it's okay for the relationship to, once it gets established, to more or less like they argue and stuff, and like it's not perfect, but it's solid, it works, it stays. And that I think has been a struggle in several instances that I've had in several different stories, to have the established relationship just kind of stay through multiple books. Well, they need to grow. It's like, well, they grow together? Why do they have to fight to get there? And so that's been an interesting conversation that I've had with actually several editors over different series. It's happened more than once.
Okay. Well, in these final minutes, we've got just a couple minutes here. Now is your chance to plug where people can find you, where they can find your books, and then we'll be done. We'll be out of here. So, Ro, why don't you go?
Okay, bye. Oh, go. Okay. You can find me at RL Merrill Author on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My website, www.rlmerrillauthor.com. My next release will be the Haunts and Hellions anthology, with my story, The House Must Fall, my little ode to Edgar Allan Poe. And then in June, I will have a story in the Love Is All charity anthology. We haven't picked our charity. Last year we did the Marsha P. Johnston Institute. So it's a great project. Zio Axelrod heads it up every year, and it's queer contemporary romance, and it's always a good time. And so I have a lesbian romance in that collection that's set in one of my kind of music worlds. So I'm excited about that to come out next.
Great. Ada, what about you?
You can go to adamritasoto.com, but admittedly that hasn't been updated in a while. Adam Rita Soto, all one word, at all the social media. I managed to land that. And if you want my books, literally just they're everywhere, anywhere online where you buy books, you can find the books. I'm not in bookstores, though you can request. But I made sure to distribute online everywhere. So
Excellent.
yeah, just put me into the search bar, you will find me. And hopefully by the beginning of June, rookerypublishing.com will be up and running, where you will be able to find my books and Jamie's book. So
Fantastic. Yay. Erica, what about you?
EricaCameron.com is the best place to start, and then it'll have links out to all of my social media sites, as well as email and contact forms and all of that sort of stuff.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for spending this hour with me talking about romance and sharing your works. For those of you watching, I suggest that you go to Icarus Books Con. Okay, let's try this again. I suggest that you go to IcarusBookCon.com, and you will find all of these wonderful people's books, or several of their books, posted there in our bookstore. And it's a great way for you to help support them, help support their works, and find some of these wonderful, amazing authors. Shortly, we'll be doing our closing for the day. Again, thank you all so much. You were my last group, and what a way to end. We got a couple of great comments here from people saying that Beta Reader does her body mapping for her, which I thought was brilliant, and just a bunch of those wonderful things. So when this is posted on the YouTube channel, go ahead and add your links in the comments. So you just need to come back and go to Icarus Books Con on YouTube and find this particular video, and you'll be able to put all of your comments there. All right. Well, thank you guys again so much. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, take care, everyone.